Hi, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello, PTE teachers or future PTE teachers. I'm calling from London and it is 5 p.m. here local time. Hi to all of you joining. We run 3 of these sessions. It's a global initiative, so we have 3 different times. And this later time slot, so this is the third and final webinar of today, is usually a bit quieter, a little bit more intimate. So, but really pleased to see at least 33 of you, but those numbers are increasing. So, welcome. A few housekeeping things to begin. The first one is I've actually disabled the chat function, but the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen is very much live. So the first thing I want to do is just check that it's working for you. So could you give me 2 yeses if you can A, hear me okay, and 2, if you can see my slides? Yeah, I have a hello and I have a yes, but Natika, thank you very much. That's a double yes. So I'm going to trust that you can hear me and see my slides. Thanks, Rupesh. Yes, for both. Brilliant. Okay, the other bit of housekeeping is that you can see the captions button at the bottom as well. This is quite helpful if you want a transcription of what I'm saying. So please feel free to turn that on. I'm not sure if all of you will have that functionality, but certainly it was useful for the cohorts before you today. And the webinar should last around 45 minutes, and then I'll leave 15 minutes for questions. So as and when you do think of your questions, just pop them in the chat. I'm sorry, not in the chat, in the Q&A function. And also your thoughts and reflections, that's a really good way for you to communicate with me. But again, I'll deal with them towards the end of the session. So let's finish promptly within the hour. And I think that is it in terms of housekeeping. What I'd like to do now is just to introduce myself to you. Some of you may have seen me or come across me at Pearson. I actually co-delivered the last webinar back in March. So if you attended that here, you get to see me again today. My role is actually Global PTE Teacher Training Manager. So I look after and support our teachers around the globe. Some of you on the call will be very experienced, some will be just starting out, and some will have had English language teaching experience, maybe experience of teaching other preparation courses. You're all welcome. I hope there will be something for everyone in this webinar. But again, let's reflect on that towards the end. So I've got 20 years plus of English language teaching and training experience. I've actually worked for a number of institutions, mostly in South America, and I imagine we've got a few folks from South America today on this call. I've also worked in the Middle East and Europe, and I'm a Cambridge CELTA tutor. So my background qualifications are Cambridge CELTA, Young Learner Extension to CELTA, the Cambridge Delta as well, and an MA in TESOL. Some of these qualifications I'm sure you have, or perhaps more localized qualifications. That's all great. You are all welcome today. Okay, so in this webinar, let's review what's going to be covered. So I've divided the webinar into three sections, essentially. The first one is going to focus on reviewing kind of our responsibilities, the expectations and pedagogical focus of a PTE teacher. So really, this is just scene setting, but I think important so you understand the narrative and story behind these slides. Objective 2, we're going to look at kind of designing effective lessons aligned with PTE outcomes and become familiar with the scoring criteria used to assess test taker performance. And then finally, we're going to look at staging PTE lessons with the focus really on implementing controlled practice activities for language development. So a lot to cover, but I think we'll manage no problem. So without further ado, let's go to the first webinar objective. Okay, so let's just review our role as PT teachers. And I think to start, I'd like you to do a quick reflection activity. Feel free to do it in your head. You can maybe pull up a Word document and type your thoughts. Perhaps you want to write on a piece of paper, that's absolutely fine. But when we, and I say we because I'm going to do this exercise as well, prepare our learners for PTE, what are we really preparing them for? Is it just about getting a score, or is it about something bigger? Think about your learners. So perhaps think about the learners in your classes to help you answer this question. I'll give you 10 seconds for that. Okay. So I'm going to answer the question first of all. So no, I don't think it's just a score. Now, that's not to say that learners see it that way. In fact, often learners simply want to get a particular score, but I do think that there is always an underlying reason as to why they want to get that score. And I think that's the first thing we need to establish is what is the score and why do you need that score? They may be wrong. They may have misinterpreted the guidance, but if they're right, are they at the right level to get that score? How long will that preparation course be to get them to that score? But also, what are their ultimate goals? So I've got 4 here as examples, and I want to really reinforce at the start of this webinar Pearson's mission, right? So Pearson, across all of its segments, all of its customers, help people realize the life they imagine through learning. And this is so applicable, I think, to our learners, because yes, they want to study abroad. Some want to migrate. Some want to get their permanent residency. Some want to work overseas. Some have bigger life goals, like joining family members in other countries. So, what I think is really important is to get a sense of that at the beginning, to be able to then support them effectively during the course. So as teachers, I feel like we are at the heart of hopefully what is a successful story, and that is incredibly empowering, right? I think for sure test prep courses and teaching test prep lessons has been the most rewarding experience probably of my teaching career in addition to teacher training, because obviously when they do get that score and when they do realize the life they imagine, it is extremely motivating. Now, often a learner will walk into my classroom with a lot of hope for the future, some pressures, fears, ambition, all of these things potentially all at once. And I think, they don't necessarily know how the test works or what will help them to succeed, but you as teachers do, and that is a part of our role. I've got a metaphor here in terms of a mountain with three key checkpoints. And if you're new to teaching the Pearson tests of English, so that includes PTE Home, PTE Core, and PTE Academic, of course, teachers first need to understand the test to be able to transfer that knowledge to their learners. But then it's really important to be able to communicate to them what is needed to do really well in the test and for each individual question type. And then, of course, and I really want to add this checkpoint, is just to build that confidence to believe in themselves. So when they walk into that test prep center, they're feeling tall and strong and confident that they can reach their goals. So today we're really going to focus on the second checkpoint, and but of course confidence and understanding the test will feed into that as well. Okay, so let's dive into what is needed to do well in PTE. And you might be wondering if there is a magic formula, and I'm going to communicate what I think is a magic formula. And you can tell me what you think. So on the far left is familiarization with a variety of topics. I do think this is really important, and the advantage for learners who stay around with you for longer is that they get to experience more topics. For PT Academic, what I mean by topic is anything related to study, and for PTE Core, anything related to everyday type situations. Language skills development and practice is part of that magic formula. I will, in the next slide, go into what I mean by that. Language systems instruction and practice, again, in the next slide, I'll go into that. You should already be thinking, what do I mean by this? I'm sure a lot of you will know. Question strategy, question practice. Now, for the purpose of this webinar, we only have a 1 hour. We're going to focus on these three. So skills, systems, and questions. And what I want to propose is this holistic approach, which I think in turn will improve the test scores, will build confidence, will generate greater language proficiency that the learners can take then into the goals that they want to realize, and then of course enhanced life skills as well, because we know that a lot of the question types in PTE reflect what we do in real life. So we're going to look later on at retelling a lecture. This is something that learners will be expected to do at tertiary education. Okay, so let's dive into these three then a little bit more deeply. And I think let's start with the far right. I don't think anyone disagrees with the fact that to prepare learners for a test, and a high stakes test at that, question strategy and practice is really key. These activities help to build familiarity with the test format, And as you know, we have 20 question types in PT Academic and 19 in Core. So it is really important to give learners that opportunity to try these out. And if you're interested in materials for that, please do kind of put your question in the Q&A and I can try to answer it later. In terms of language systems, I've identified 4 because they're lifted from our scoring criteria. So grammar, vocabulary, also known as lexis, pronunciation or phonology, and functional language, so functions as well. And then finally, the 4 skills. And as you know, the PT tests are structured with the speaking and writing skills in section 1 of the 2 tests, reading section 2, and listening section 3. So I guess what I am advocating here and you know, is kind of a holistic, balanced approach across all 3 buckets. But I appreciate that some of you currently may be doing more of one than the other. So I'd like you just to finish this section now with just quickly reflecting on what percentage of the lesson do you spend on each currently. I expect in some cases it's going to be very question, strategy, and practice heavy, but perhaps in other contexts it's going to be quite language systems heavy with some question, strategy, and practice. And I think it is, of course, very context specific, but I think worth to take these moments like webinars to kind of pause, stop, reflect, and is there perhaps a need to kind of up one or the other? And it might be that a particular learner needs that, right? So again, very circumstantial, but good, I think, to reflect on your own practice in the PTE classroom. Okay, so let's move to the second section now on lesson objectives. So I just want to start with a piece of advice that was given to me many, many years ago, and I have adopted ever since. And curious to know whether anyone in the webinar also follows this approach. So a trainer many years ago said to me, plan backwards, right? Start with the outcome or the output, the learner output, right? So it could be something really physical, like them handing in an essay, or it could be something more communicative, spoken, etc. So that's the outcome. And I just thought, okay, well, this works really well for PTE prep because, of course, there is an output, right? They need to submit something at the end of the lesson. And to plan backwards, this is specifically for the kind of extended task, speaking and writing task, then the key is to plan backwards to build the skills and confidence they need to create that output. So I've kind of provided 3 scenarios for the purpose of this webinar. So in scenario 1, a PT academic class, I really want my students to successfully summarize the main points of a written text in 75 words. In scenario 2, I want them to successfully write an email in a minimum of 80 words and a maximum of 120 words. That's really important. And that's for PT Core. And then scenario 3 for PT Academic, I want them to successfully retell the main points of a lecture to the partner in 40 seconds. So these are 3 clear outputs. You'll notice that all 3 have come from the speaking and writing section. And all of them have the adverb successfully in italics. And why I wanted to call that out is because I don't just want them to submit an essay or a summary or retell a lecture. I want them to do really well, right? Because I really want to to get them the best score that I possibly can. So, how do we as teachers understand what successful looks like? And I really have one answer for you, which is our PTE academic test taker score guide and our PTE core test taker score guide. This document um, is essential for teachers. I either have it on my phone in class, I either have it on my screen, or I have a printout. Why? It is a lengthy document. I think all teachers, if you are, aspiring to be a PT teacher, should read it cover to cover, but it's extremely detailed and it is impossible to memorize and remember all of it. So it is a document that I think that needs to be referred to in class, particularly when giving feedback on these learner outputs that I talked about. And we'll dive a bit more deeply into the key sections for teachers in a little bit. So let's take scenario one then. We said that question type was summarized written text. That's for PT academic. And I'd like you to do a little task. So we talked about like the three kind of aspects of the magic formula. We've got language skills, language systems, and then question strategy and practice. What I'd like you to do is just read my main and subsidiary aims and just identify if it's skills or systems. And I'll just give 5 seconds for this. Okay, well done. Okay, so you guessed correctly. I hope so. So the main output here, the outcome is to write, summarize a written text clearly and concisely in 75 words so that they are writing. So that's language skills. And then the two subsidiary aims, well, before they can summarize the written text, they need to read the text. So reading here is important in the lesson, and also to be able to write a good summary. Well, actually, there's a lot of language that is needed, but one thing I have called out is the use of conjunctions to form compound sentences. So if you look at the strategies on the side, for those of you new to PTE, test takers are required to just write one sentence. And as we know, the lower the level, the shorter the sentences, and the longer the sentences, the accuracy then kind of falls by the wayside. So it is really important to first encourage development of creating these complex sentences, and then obviously instilling the accuracy layer on top. So how do I kind of successfully mark this output, right? So let's imagine that the output comes in. How do I assess it? Right? Well, I've got some options. I could either get two learners to kind of assess each other, or I can give the feedback. And the feedback that I give comes directly from this score guide. Please do learn this terminology. So we call them traits. Okay, so there's form, content, grammar, and vocabulary, 4 traits that are assessed in summarized written text. And you'll notice the rating scale. This is really, really, really important. The description is key because I often use the wording in the description that comes directly from Pearson in the feedback that I give. So, for example, I would literally say, well done, Daniela, you have written one single complete sentence, okay? And that is really, really good. Now the score guide gives a lot more information. It also tells you about the integrated skills. So how each question type kind of feeds into the four skills. Sometimes it just feeds into one. And it also talks a little bit about what gives example responses with some kind of explanations as well. So really useful document. I would really encourage you to block some time this week if you haven't already to kind of familiarize yourself with the document. Let's have a look at scenario 2. We're going to go through all of them. Could you do the same? Could you read the main and the subsidiary aim and identify, is it skills or is it systems? 5 seconds. Okay, so it's skills. The output is writing an email. This is for PTE core, and this needs to be done between 80 and 120 words. And then language systems for the subsidiary aim. What I have done coming into PTE is just tried the question types out myself. And what happens once you do them, obviously, you learn very quickly what language is needed to be successful. Now, for you, you haven't seen the prompt for this email question type. But I did, and I saw that one of the asks was to make a polite request. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm not sure my learners are going to have that language at their disposal. And if some of them do, I'm not convinced that they will be able to write these functional exponents accurately. So I am consciously aware that I need to spend time on it in the lesson. In terms of the strategies for this question type, well, of course, it is important to underline the key points in the prompt. We talked about the common phrases for a particular function. Emails have a basic structure. Tone and formality is important. Opening and closing salutation is important. Allocating time for proofreading is really important. Now, this is something that you would need to instill. I think it's really important to call out that the PT tests are 100% computer based. So it may be, and this certainly happened to me when I took the test, I know how to spell these words accurately, but I noticed when I was proofreading that I had made several mistakes because just, typing can be sometimes a little tricky when you're under pressure and you're trying to type quite fast. So again, a second read through, a third read through, if time allows, is really essential. And the more we kind of instill this in the classroom, the better, in my opinion. So again, looking at the scoring criteria, the email comes back to us, okay, and we have actually 6 traits that are assessed in Right Email. And you'll notice here, again, the rating scale differs from 0 to 3 to 0 to 2 in some cases. And the description is slightly more heavy, slightly more weighted. So again, really important that you kind of read and understand the nuances between each of the numbers. Okay, let's have a look at the third one now. So the third scenario is Retell lecture. And I'd like you to do the same activity again. Could you please identify if it's language skills or language systems? 5 seconds. Okay. So the first one, of course, is we are telling the lecture, right? So very much speaking, and this can be done to the teacher in one-to-one classes or to a partner. Learners in the subsidiary aim also need to listen to a prompt, and this, of course, is listening. And I have done this many times and again assessed what language is needed, and for sure sequences are really helpful just to kind of structure the order. And I have not named a few here: first, then, next, after that, for a kind of a B1 level class. Now, one thing I want to call out is that taking notes is a skill in itself. I do wonder whether a standalone lesson is required for note taking. It's really important, I think, for this question type, because it's difficult, obviously, to remember what was being said in the lecture. And note taking is a life skill. It's really important. I definitely could easily create at least one lesson on note taking, which then perhaps earlier on in the course or just before some of the listening, speaking, question types, because I think it is so valuable for test takers in the test. So again, they have role played perhaps the retelling of the lecture to their partner in class. And again, whether this is peer-to-peer feedback, it certainly lends itself to that. But again, we have 4 traits that are assessed here. Actually, no, 3. It's content, pronunciation, and oral fluency. And you'll see here that the rating scale is much higher. It goes up to 5. So again, just having an understanding of what makes it a 3, what makes it a 5. And I think, honestly, the more pieces of work or the more retelling lectures that you hear and record and replay back, the more comfortable you will be using the rating scale. Okay, so I think that's the end of this second section. We're making good time. I guess the purpose of this section was really to kind of promote this planning backwards approach with PTE lessons, particularly for these extended open responses that the test requires for speaking and writing. And also just to emphasize that holistic approach of language skills, language system, question strategy, and practice as kind of this magic formula, and just really aligning the objectives to that. And I think, I would really call out, like, if you are trying to start teaching PTE, there is just no better way than doing it yourself. From the experience, obviously, of a learner, but also having your teacher hat on and thinking what language is really needed in these question types to support the learners, and then trying to then fit that into your syllabus and your lessons. So let's look at that in more detail, because this is where the staging of the lesson comes in. So how are we going to help learners reach the desired outcomes? And I'm sure many of you have heard of the term scaffolding in pedagogy, which is represented in this ladder, which is that we need to create lesson stages that build one to the next, with the ultimate goal of achieving that output or outcome that we discussed. So again, we're going to refer back to the first scenario, and I'm going to just show you what that looks like in practice. You'll see here that I've got 8 stages. 8 is my lucky number, but that is not a good rationale for having 8 stages. But what I've done is I've tried to highlight in orange the output or the outcome, which is like a draft summary of a written text. And working backwards from 8 to 1, you'll see at number 1 is the starter activity, also known as a warm-up, but I've called it a lead-in for the purpose of this webinar. What you'll see is the subsidiary aims here, reading for specific information and reading for detail, because we know they have to read the text before they summarize it. And I called out compound sentences as a really useful bit of language to support learners. Now, I don't think that just because I teach it to them that they're going to be able to use them. So I've added a control practice activity just to help them practice that specific bit of language before then encouraging them to use that language in their draft summary. So let's look at the strategies, because obviously we need to feed these in somehow, and it's really up to you when and how you do it. But the essence here is that they need to write in one sentence. So it's clear that this has to come in the instructions to the activity, the draft summary. We have to remind learners about the word count. That's really important, because as per the scoring criteria, they do get penalized if they don't adhere to it. And then we've got, the language that is needed to write long sentences, right? So compound sentences is one example, but defining and non-defining relative clauses is a clear example of writing complex structures. Nominalization as well is really key to that. You may want to have standalone language lessons on that. That's great. I super encourage that if the course timetable allows, but I appreciate some people are teaching so a very short schedule. And so you may need to choose which one of these is going to be most beneficial to your learners, dependent, of course, on their level. And of course, a strategy that is really important is to kind of underline the key and the main ideas or the key points in the supporting details to then be able to lift into the learner's summary. I haven't got them to do that in the lesson. I'm actually trying actively to develop their reading for specific information in detail, because don't forget, there is another section of the PTE test where they need to practice these sub skills or need to demonstrate them. So again, the more practice I give them, the better. But I do think the strategy of underlining is also necessary, perhaps when they come to do the question practice independently. So just to finish up scenario 1, I've got some nice control practice activities. Some of them are semi-controlled. I will talk about the first one in blue just because it's relevant to the lesson that I've just talked you through. But I think what's really simple and can be the level of challenge can be increased or decreased depending on the level of students, is providing them with 2 sentences and then asking them to select a conjunction to put in the middle and bring it all together, and obviously rationalize their choice. I think that's a really lovely activity to do. I also think a verb to noun transformation, I think, is really important, but potentially for higher levels. I've given you an example. So for example, with the verb, the government failed to respond quickly to the crisis. It caused public criticism. And then changing it to the noun, the government's failure to respond quickly to the crisis caused public criticism. I'm sure many of you are already language teachers, so you will know that defining relative clauses and non-defining relative clauses, well, they are essentially a grammar point that is referenced in all course books from my experience. So you won't be short of controlled practice activities for those, but I do think they're really valuable language points in PTE, particularly with summarized written text. Let's look at scenario 2. We've got 2 more before we finish. So here you've noticed, and again, there's no right way of doing this, right? But my rationale is that I would like them to draft an email. I'd like to give them feedback because there's a lot to give feedback on when it comes to emails, and then redraft it before sharing with the class and each other so they can learn from each other. What's really essential before stage 5 is, again, explicit language clarification on polite requests, and then some control practice on polite requests before then. They have no option but to use them because the prompt asks them to politely request. And then again, reading the prompt really carefully, and then this is where the strategy comes in. If you look at the very bottom, reminding learners to identify keywords in the prompt. It is essential that they find out who the email needs to be addressed to, what the purpose of the email is, and what details need to be included. It's not just one detail, it's 3, and they do need to detail all 3. We talked about the common phrases that I'd like to teach them. Again, this is kind of sits with my values of not just preparing learners for the test, but also to set them up for success in their lives. I think you won't disagree that these common phrases are, well, common because they are very, very useful. So definitely worthwhile to teach. And then, of course, we need to review the basic structure of an email. I mean, most people know, right, what that is. It depends, of course, how old your learners are. Tone and formality and that consistency sometimes can be difficult for learners. And then the opening and closing salutation, as you know, again, with that formality, they sometimes write yours sincerely when they're writing to a friend, which obviously it doesn't read well at all. So in terms of control practice activities, I think the focus for me is on the blue. This is actually semi-controlled, but I think with this good class, I would probably provide them some prompts and get them to finish the sentence. So could you, and then up to them to finish, or I was wondering if you, and then they finish the sentence. But there are lots of other activities, and I've named 3 here. Some of my favorites, again, would be great if you could try these out if you're not doing them already. But obviously an error correction activity, providing them with an email that has inaccuracies, and that could be with the functional language that you're teaching, but it could be also with the structure and the tone, formality, etc. A sentence scramble, so you've mixed up the words and they have to unscramble them to make a correct polite request. I think that's a lovely activity. And then sentence transformation, what I mean by that is giving them something like, I need help, which obviously with that tone, it's like it's a little bit abrupt and a little bit rude. And then asking them to use the polite request to kind of transform that into a more acceptable way of saying it. Okay, so scenario 3. So here we are. I've actually got the output mentioned twice here, Retell lecture. Why? Because I would like them to try it out as much as possible. In the test, they speak for 40 seconds. That's not very long in the classroom, and then therefore there are lots of opportunities, I think, where they can just keep going and keep doing it and improving each time. You'll notice that this is kind of a test teach test approach, in the sense that I'm going to get them to retell the lecture just as how they want, and then I'm going to teach them the sequences, give them some practice of sequences, and then they need to do it with the sequences the next time round, and we reflect on that kind of journey. Before that, of course, they need to listen to the lecture. And again, I just want to call out that I have included listening for detail and listening for gist as sub-skill kind of practice development. But you may want to just get them to listen and kind of take notes to kind of reflect what they will do in the test. But again, as I say, remember that listening is a big part of the test. It's got its own section. And by building these skills in these lessons, you'll be able to set them up for success in that final part of the test. In terms of strategies here, we talked about note-taking already. We've talked about sequences. I mean, there are other bits of language, but I think the structure is really important. There's a frame, right, that they could certainly use, because 40 seconds is not really a long time. So I'll try and call that out in the far right. If you look at this final activity, in italics, I've written the lecture was about, the speaker first mentioned, then, finally. So I'm using the sequences, but also providing them a structured framework. And I think this is really important for particularly lower level learners. Retell phrases bingo. Well, there could be, for higher level learners, some good phrases such as the speaker mentioned according to the lecture. They could maybe retell the lecture and kind of tick them off as they say these phrases, just to encourage that variety. Paraphrase sentence completion. I think this is a really good one. So you see here, I've written many students, but if the learners in class get to paraphrase it, they will say a lot of learners. And I think it's just, again, instilling that, you know, we don't always retell a lecture exactly in the words that are being used, because we can't remember, right, what was said. But as long as we are using synonyms, etc., to kind of convey the accurate message, that's great. And I think this activity really demonstrates that. And then a picture sequence description. So perhaps for very visual learners, you could have a process that's depicted through pictures or images. And then again, using those sequences, they tell that story. Again, just, you know, in the context of a university or a real life situation for PTE core. So that is it from me. I just want to kind of show you a few things before we go to Q&A. So key takeaways. I think, first of all, effective PTE preparation involves developing language skills. We can't argue with that. The test them. Language systems as well. I think I've really demonstrated, I hope I've demonstrated, that these question types often lend themselves to specific language points, and they should be exploited in class. And then focused on strategy and lots of practice, so they get familiar with the test format, the timing, etc. One advantage for me is definitely to plan the output or the learner outcome, particularly for those open-ended question types, and design lessons with like clear and supportive stages that build towards that goal. Now, there's obviously no right way to teach a lesson, but every decision should be intentional. So I think I forgot to mention, but in the right email, I give learners 9 minutes. Why? Because that is how long they have in the test to respond to that question. And this will just build confidence, I guess, on entering the test center. So a couple of the resources I think would be really valuable for you. So the score guide, we mentioned the for PT Academic and Core. Now this QR code doesn't actually take you directly to these five. It takes you to our website, but from there you'll be able to navigate to all of these. So PT Academic Score Guide, PT Core Score Guide can be found under the scoring section. PT Expert is our course book for PT Academic. And again, it just marries up with the pedagogy that I've been talking to today. So a really good one if you want to have a go at having ready-made lessons. Official Guide to PT for Teachers. This is really heavy on strategy, but really, really useful. I think if maybe you haven't taught a test prep class before, a lot of these question types learners may have experienced at school or at university, but maybe not for a really long time. So I think strategy use is really important. And then we do have on our PT for Teachers site a PT lesson plans, but again, they're very strategy focused and don't quite marry with the kind of language, well, they do in some ways, but with the skills systems and question strategy and practice kind of holistic approach. But would love you to explore. So the PT page, if you go to the top, you'll see a drop down for PT for teachers, and I'd really love you to kind of explore that. That is my page, and I try and update it when I can. Next steps. So by tomorrow, not immediately, but you'll receive an email from Zoom with a link to a short feedback survey. And then once you've completed it, you'll be able to download your certificate. So this is just an FYI, and it will look something like what's on the screen. Okay, and then just to finish, the next webinar is on I Teach PT reading. So we'll look at those sub skills of reading again and how to develop them, but also look more in depth at the 5 question types for reading for both PT Core and PT Academic. Okay, so again, you can use the QR code to sign up for that, and that page sits within the PT for Teachers webpage. So this will direct you straight there. Okay, I'll move on. The final slide is basically a thank you slide with my email. But what I'd like to do now is just to go to the Q&A and see what questions we have there. We've got around 9 minutes for these. So let's have a look. Lots of yeses I can see from initially from the session, which is great. So Natika, this is really good. So a nice idea here from you. So yeah, I think the aim here, I agree, is for learners to be able to express themselves clearly and confidently, and yeah, develop ideas. That's what we want from our learners, right? And we're here to help them do that. Lovely. That's very kind of you, Mohammed. Yeah, really nice comment. Thank you very much. So Nanduni, the presentation actually won't be shared with you. We don't do that actually after our webinars. That's not the standard practice, but the session is going to be recorded, or it is being recorded. So in a week's time, check that PT for Teachers webinar page. It'll be uploaded there, and then you'll be able to kind of fast forward to the slide that you want to revisit. Yeah, I think that's probably the best thing to say. And Nanduni, just while I'm here, please do encourage your colleagues to look back historically at all the webinars that have been given, because we have the recordings from the 2023 series, the 2024 and the 2025 series. So 2023 is when we started this initiative. So you're more than welcome to flick through and kind of review what you think is useful. Okay, there's a question here that I don't know the answer to. Okay, so Mohammed has asked a really interesting question. Do you think critical period hypothesis ever had any relevance to the design of the PTE question? Okay, that's a really good question. The best thing to do here is I'm going to recommend you join an Ask Me Anything session. So when you go to our webinar page, you'll see that we have a lot of webinars, but we also have every quarter Ask Me Anything. And this is like an hour session. There's only one in the day. It's not recorded, but basically we have some experts on the call who can answer these more specific questions. I really just want to answer questions on PT lessons, if that's okay. Okay, good. Katika, I could see that you were like contributing with your answers. That's great. Charandeep, as I said, yes, the recording will be up within a week. Just remember to scroll to the bottom of the page because it's the upcoming webinars at the top, and then at the bottom you see all the historic webinars. Okay, so a really good question from Kanu. What is the word limit of summarized spoken text? Okay, and that sits within the listening section. We looked at summarized written text. Now, I'm not going to answer this explicitly, but what I will say to all of you is there are three numbers you're probably going to have to remember. One is the length of the prompt. So how long is the reading text and how long is the listening text? How long do the learners have to prepare? And then how long is the output, the response that they need to give? All three aren't relevant always to every question type, but the best place to find that answer is on our website under PTE Academic and Core and Test Format. You'll see under Test Format, you have a description of each question type, and it gives you that information. The length of the prompt, the length of the prompt, the preparation time, and what is required. So Kanu, as a good teacher, I'm going to ask you to go to the test format and look for it yourself. And I encourage others to do that. Okay, so yes, Ibrahim, you will get a certificate for attending, but as I mentioned, you need to fill in the survey. That will come into your email, so don't worry, just be patient, wait for that, fill in the survey, and then you'll be able to get your certificate. Okay, so a nice thank you from Mutlu. Thank you. I appreciate your thank you. Okay, so Sandeep has a really good question. Could you please suggest some easy ways to help students take effective notes? Look, there are a number of ways to do this. Off the top of my head, I would obviously give them practice of it, but some of the key strategies here are using acronyms, abbreviations, not full sentences, but keywords. I would kind of list out these strategies. Okay, because there probably is an exhaustive list, and you can collate that maybe in the staff room talking to teachers or on Google. And then depending on the level of your learners, I would either practice with one and then add another and another, or if they're a strong class, just ask them to practice with all of them. Also get them to kind of reflect on whether they note take in their own language, because it may be that they already know of these strategies in their L1, and actually all it is just to transfer them over to English, but maybe they just need the support of the teacher to make that connection for them. So try that as a starter for 10. Okay, Pani, could you please share more resources? So everything is on our website. Honey, one thing that I would really recommend is our Smart Prep resources. So if you go to and type in Smart Prep, um, you will see test question kind of test tip document, guided practice tests as well, videos that explain each of these question types in detail. So Smart Prep is a free resource. You can access it through our webpage. You have to sign up though. But again, once you enter, it's free. And that's got a lot of resource that kind of ticks the box around question, strategy, and practice. Okay, a good one. I think I'm going to finish here. Is there a certified course that allows teachers to become certified PTE teachers? Yes. Okay, so it really depends what part of the world you sit in. But we do have courses at level 1 and at level 2. So level 1 are for new teachers straight in, who are kind of exploring the possibility of becoming PT teachers, and then level 2 are those who have some experience behind them. Um, uh, the best thing to do is either to send me an email, and you can see that on the screen, I hope, but just explicitly state which region you are from, because what I would then do is put you in contact with someone from that region to help you. Now, we don't run these courses in every region, so I can't promise that, but in a lot of regions where PT is very popular, we definitely do. Okay, so Nanduni, thank you very much. Very kind words. The rest of you, there are about 5 questions that I haven't answered. I'm really sorry about that. I suggest you join the Ask Me Anything session. And just kind of ask them again, and or join the reading session. But again, normally the Q&A is for questions on the topic of the webinar. Thank you, Parneet. I really appreciate that you thought it was valuable. And Kushi, I wish you a good morning, afternoon, evening. I don't know where you are. Fatima, thank you. It's now 6:01 local time, London time, so I'm going to call it a day. Thank you, everyone, and hope to see you at the next webinar. All the best. Bye.